"That's her," a voice murmurs. "The one who killed her mother." The whisper, sharp as a shard of glass, cuts through the polite symphony of the Drake Annual Charity Gala. From a velvet armchair tucked into a dark corner, Emma Drake hears it all. She has learned over the last 10 years that sound is a weapon. She perceives the grand ballroom not as a space of light and color, but as a treacherous landscape of noise. The clinking of champagne flutes is a constant, brittle chatter. The clicks of heels on marble are like footsteps in a haunted house. But the most terrifying sound is the one that follows her. The sudden, pointed silence that falls whenever she is near. A vacuum of sound where conversations die. People don't stare at the blind girl. They give her a wide, cold berth, and their whispers follow in her wake like a chilling draft. 10 years of this has taught her not to flinch. It has taught her to keep her back straight, her chin up, and her face a mask of serene emptiness. It has taught her to be a statue, a monument to a tragedy she is forced to embody, but not allowed to remember. On a stage bathed in a warm, forgiving spotlight, her father, Malcolm Drake, is at the podium. At 55, he is handsome, charismatic, a titan of industry with a voice that commands attention. He is delivering a flawless speech about resilience, about the strength of the human spirit in the face of unspeakable loss. He gestures towards her, a subtle, practiced movement. "My daughter, Emma," he says, his voice thick with a perfectly measured dose of grief. "Her courage every single day is an inspiration to us all." A wave of manufactured pity washes through the room. A collective sigh from 300 people in designer gowns and bespoke suits. They see the brave father, the tragic hero standing strong for his broken child. And they see her, the source of his heroic pain, his tragic burden. Working his janitorial shift along the far wall, Thomas Kellen watches from the shadows. He empties a silver champagne bucket, his movements quiet and efficient, his presence as a service worker granting him a cloak of invisibility. He is not looking at the powerful CEO or the glittering crowd. His eyes are fixed on the young woman in the corner. He sees not the broken heiress, the tragic figure from the society pages, but a 26-year-old suffocating in a gilded cage. He has seen her before, during his late-night shifts. A lonely silhouette on the penthouse balcony, a fleeting shape in a darkened hallway. He knows loneliness when he sees it. It has been his constant companion since his wife died, leaving him to raise their daughter Maeve alone. He overhears 2 women by a floral arrangement, their voices low but clear. "It's shameful, really, that he brings her out like this." "I know. Can you imagine living with that guilt?" She was only 16, reached for the radio, they say, and sent the car right off the road. Killed her own mother. Tragic Thomas feels a cold anger tighten in his chest. They speak of her as if she isn't there, as if her blindness makes her deaf as well. He sees her hand, resting in the lap of her silk dress, clench into a fist, her knuckles white. She hears them. Of course, she hears them. The speech ends. The applause is deafening. A roar of approval for Malcolm's performance. He steps down from the stage, and the room comes alive again. People form a receiving line to shake his hand, to offer their condolences and their business cards. Not a single person approaches the corner where Emma sits. She is an island, surrounded by a sea of people who would rather drown than get too close. Then, the orchestra conductor raises his baton. A new melody begins, a haunting, achingly familiar waltz. The song cuts through the noise, and Emma freezes, her breath catching in her throat. Her hand tightens on the arm of her chair, the velvet plush beneath her fingers suddenly feeling like a trap. It's a song from a dream she can't quite grasp, a melody that feels like a ghost's touch on the back of her neck. The floor begins to fill with dancing couples, swirling figures of color and light that Emma can only imagine. She remains utterly alone, the music wrapping around her, dredging up a formless terror from the depths of her mind. The feeling of being trapped, the smell of rain, the sound of a scream. A powerful, unthinking compassion moves Thomas. He has a daughter, Maeve, who is only 8. He thinks of her bright, fearless spirit and imagines her being treated like this, being made to feel like a ghost in her own life. He cannot stand it. He puts down his cleaning cart. He straightens his simple black uniform jacket. He begins to walk. He moves through the crowd of gaping aristocrats, a janitor crossing a line no one in this room would ever dare to cross. They stare, their conversations faltering as they watch the invisible man become visible. He is breaking the unspoken rules that hold their world together. He doesn't stop until he is standing before her. Emma can feel the shift in the atmosphere, the sudden focus of the room's attention. She senses a presence before her, someone standing close, blocking the faint warmth from the chandeliers. She tenses, expecting a clumsy word of pity or a security guard telling her she needs to move. Thomas leans in slightly, his voice gentle, meant only for her. "May I have this dance?" The question is so simple, so direct, so normal, that it takes her breath away. No one has asked her that in 10 years. No one has treated her like a woman who might want to dance. They treat her like a fragile object, a memorial to be observed from a safe distance. Shock renders her speechless. She hesitates. A decade of hiding, of making herself small, screaming at her to refuse, to stay in the safety of her corner. But then she remembers the whispers, the pity, the cold, empty space around her. And she hears the kindness in this stranger's voice. It is a simple, honest, human connection, offered without agenda. She gives a small, trembling nod and reaches out her hand into the space in front of her. Thomas takes it. The warmth of his calloused palm envelops her cool, delicate fingers. He doesn't pull or guide her with force. He simply holds her hand, a silent promise of support. And for the first time in a very long time, Emma Drake doesn't feel like she's about to fall. She feels anchored. As Thomas leads her from the corner, the ballroom seems to hold its breath. The whispers die, replaced by a dense, heavy silence that is somehow louder. For Emma, the sensation is overwhelming. The sudden absence of the usual murmurs makes the air feel thick, and the focused energy of 300 guests feels like a physical pressure on her skin. Every footstep echoes on the marble. Her heart hammers against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady rhythm of the waltz. For 10 years, she has been a ghost, an object of pity and whispers. Now, she is a spectacle. Thomas feels the stairs like 100 tiny needles. He doesn't look at the crowd. He keeps his gaze soft, focused somewhere over Emma's shoulder, giving her the dignity of his full, respectful attention. He can feel Malcolm Drake's fury radiating from across the room, a palpable heat. But in his hand, Emma's fingers are cold as ice. His grip is firm and reassuring. Just get her through the song, he tells himself. One song, he pulls her gently into the formal dance hold. Her left hand rests tentatively on his shoulder, and his right hand finds the small of her back. She is stiff, her body a rigid line of fear. He begins with the simplest step of the waltz, a slow, deliberate box step, counting softly under his breath, just as he used to do with his wife, Amanda. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Emma's mind is a storm of anxiety, but her body remembers. At 16, before the crash, she had attended dozens of these events. The steps are ingrained in a part of her that trauma hasn't touched. After a few clumsy seconds, her feet begin to follow his lead. The rigid posture softens, her spine lengthens. She is still terrified, but she is dancing. Across the floor, Malcolm Drake begins to move. He descends from the stage, his face a mask of controlled rage. He walks with a predatory grace, weaving through his guests, who part for him like water for a shark. His eyes are locked on the janitor, a low-level employee who has dared to lay hands on his daughter, his most valuable prop. This public display of rebellion is an existential threat to the narrative he has so carefully constructed. Thomas sees him coming. He doesn't falter. He continues to lead Emma through the simple, repeating steps of the waltz, creating a small, safe world for them in the center of the hostile ballroom. "You're doing great," he murmurs, his voice a low, steady anchor. The encouragement, so simple and genuine, reaches a part of Emma that has been starved for a decade. A tiny, fragile smile touches her lips. For a fleeting moment, she isn't the tragic Emma Drake. She isn't the girl who killed her mother. She's just a young woman, dancing. But the music continues its haunting refrain, and with the movement, the key turns further in the locked door of her memory. The melody is no longer just a song. It's a trigger. A flash, violent and unbidden, explodes behind her eyes. Not an image, but a chaotic burst of sensation. The percussive thrum of heavy rain on a car roof. The smell of leather and her mother's jasmine perfume. Her mother's voice, not singing along to the radio, but tight with anger. "You can't speak to me that way, Malcolm." Emma's breath hitches. The fragile smile vanishes. Her body goes rigid again, but this time it's not from social fear, it's from a deeper, colder terror. Her steps falter. Thomas feels the change instantly. The hand on his shoulder tightens, her fingers digging into his uniform jacket. He steadies her, his hand firm on her back. "It's all right," he says softly. "I've got you." But she is no longer in the ballroom. The waltz has transported her back into the back seat of that car, a 16-year-old girl watching her parents fight. Her father's voice, a low, furious snarl. "I built this life. You think you can question me?" A sudden, violent lurch. Not the smooth sway of a dance, but the sickening, unnatural motion of a car losing control. The high-pitched screech of tires on wet asphalt. Her mother's laughter from earlier in the drive, now turning into a single, sharp scream. "No," Emma whispers, her voice barely audible. Her face has gone pale. Her eyes, though unseeing, are wide with a horrifying, emerging memory. Malcolm is closer now, only 20 feet away, his stride quickening. His guests watch in rapt silence, sensing the drama is escalating beyond a simple breach of etiquette into something far more raw and unpredictable. Thomas knows he has to get her out of there. The dance was meant to be a kindness, not a catalyst for a breakdown. He begins to steer her toward the edge of the floor, toward the quiet of the terrace doors. But Emma seems frozen, her feet locked to the floor, her mind trapped in the chaotic final seconds of her old life. I remember," she stammers, her hand gripping his arm with shocking strength. "The music. My mother." Her father's shadow falls over them, blocking out the light, casting them in a sudden chill. Malcolm Drake has arrived. "The dance is over," he says, his voice dangerously soft, each word a perfectly polished threat. He reaches out, his hand like a claw, to grab Thomas's shoulder. Before Malcolm's fingers can clamp down on his shoulder, Thomas reacts. It's not an aggressive move, but a fluid, protective one. With a firm pressure on Emma's back, he continues the motion of the waltz, spinning them both a half-turn. The simple maneuver neatly evades Malcolm's grasp and places his own body squarely between the enraged CEO and his daughter. For a brief, stunning moment, the janitor is shielding the heiress from her own father. The crowd lets out a collective gasp. "Get your hands off of her," Malcolm snarls, his voice a low, venomous hiss meant only for Thomas. The charming public facade has vanished, replaced by the cold fury of a king whose authority has been challenged by a peasant. "You are finished." Not just here. In this city, Thomas doesn't answer. He can feel Emma trembling against him, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He keeps a steadying hand on her, his only concern to shield her from the coming storm. But it's Malcolm's voice, that specific tone of controlled, menacing rage, that provides the final, horrifying key. It's the same voice she heard in the car. The memory is no longer a confusing flash. It's a perfect, crystal-clear image exploding in the darkness of her mind. She is 16 again, in the back seat of the new Drake Motors sedan. The haunting waltz is on the radio. Her mother is driving, her face illuminated by the dashboard lights, her expression tight with a familiar sadness. Her father is in the passenger seat, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low growl as he argues with a board member. The argument ends. He snaps his phone shut. Her mother says something, a quiet, pleading question. "Malcolm, please, not in front of Emma." And then his reply, cold and dismissive. "You will not question my decisions. Not ever." Then she sees it. The image that her mind has spent 10 years burying under a mountain of guilt. Her father's arm, clad in the dark gray wool of his suit jacket, shooting across the center console. She sees his hand, with its heavy gold signet ring, clamping down over their mothers on the steering wheel. She remembers the violent, brutal jerk as he wrenched the wheel to the right. The lie shatters. It wasn't a distraction. It wasn't the radio. It wasn't her. It was an act of rage. Emma tears herself away from Thomas's protective hold. She stumbles forward, her body shaking uncontrollably, not with fear, but with the seismic shock of a decade of self-hatred being obliterated in a single instant. The orchestra has faltered into silence. The entire, vast ballroom is utterly still. She turns her head toward the sound of her father's breathing, a sound she now recognizes as the growl of a predator. "It wasn't me," she says, her voice a raw, broken whisper that somehow carries to every corner of the room. The guests lean in, straining to hear. Malcolm's face darkens. "Emma, that's enough. You're making a scene. I didn't do it," she says again, her voice gaining a strength fueled by a decade of stolen truth. She raises a trembling hand, pointing not at him, but in the direction of his voice. "You! It was you!" A wave of shock ripples through the crowd. "We were arguing," Emma continues, the words pouring out of her now, a torrent of memory. "You and Mom. She told you to stop, and you got angry." Her voice cracks, thick with unshed tears for the mother she has spent 10 years believing she killed. "You grabbed the wheel." The accusation hangs in the air, stark and horrifying. For a moment, Malcolm Drake looks completely exposed, his mask of grieving fatherhood stripped away to reveal something ugly and violent beneath. The silence is absolute, accusatory, but a master manipulator does not fold under pressure. He recovers in a heartbeat. The look of shock melts away, replaced by an expression of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. A sad, condescending smile touches his lips. He shakes his head slowly, a gesture of infinite patience in the face of madness. He turns, not to Emma, but to his horrified guests, opening his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "My poor daughter," he says, his voice a masterpiece of controlled anguish. "You see what this terrible, terrible guilt has done to her." He takes a step toward Emma, but stops, as if afraid of frightening a wounded animal. "Darling," he coos, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I know you're in pain. I know you wish you could undo that night. We all do." He addresses the crowd again. The mind is a fragile thing. When faced with a trauma it cannot bear, sometimes it creates fantasies, stories to shift the blame, to protect itself from a truth that is simply too much to carry. He looks back at his daughter with a look of pure pity. She has carried this burden for a decade. It's no wonder she's confused. He has done it. In 30 seconds, he has taken her moment of pure, liberating truth and twisted it into a pathetic spectacle of mental instability. He has recast himself as the victim, the long-suffering father of a disturbed, confused child. The crowd, which had been frozen in shock, begins to murmur. They look from the powerful, heartbroken CEO to his trembling, blind daughter. Who are they to believe? The story they've been told for 10 years, or this sudden, hysterical outburst? Emma stands defeated, her accusation neutralized, her truth dismissed as delusion. Thomas watches, his fists clenched at his sides, a wave of protective fury washing over him. He looks at Emma's face, at the raw agony there, and he sees not madness, but the terrifying clarity of a woman who has just woken up in a nightmare. He believes her. In a room full of people who see a broken girl, he is the only one who sees a survivor telling her story. And he knows, with a certainty that settles deep in his bones, that this cannot be the end. Malcolm Drake, a master of optics, does not allow the silence to linger. He signals with a barely perceptible flick of his fingers. Two men in dark suits, previously positioned discreetly against the walls, begin to move through the crowd with quiet purpose. They are his personal security, their faces impassive. He steps toward his daughter, his expression one of profound, fatherly pain. "Come, darling," he says, his voice a gentle murmur for all to hear. "Let's get you home. You're overwrought. It's been a long night." He reaches for her arm. The moment his fingers touch her, Emma flinches as if burned. His grip is not the gentle touch of a concerned father. It's a vice of cold steel, an immediate assertion of control. It's the grip of a jailer. "No," she whispers, trying to pull away. The crowd murmurs, interpreting her resistance as another symptom of her hysteria. Poor thing, she doesn't even want her own father's help. "Security will escort you," Malcolm says, his voice dropping so only she can hear it, the false sympathy replaced by a chilling command. "Do not make this any worse than it already is." They begin to pull her away from the center of the ballroom, away from Thomas. Her truth has been told, and then expertly suffocated in less than a minute. She is being erased from the scene, her outburst now just an unfortunate interruption to an otherwise perfect evening. Desperation claws at her. She fought her way out of a 10-year-old mental prison only to be dragged into a physical one. Her father will lock her away, medicate her, ensure her delusion never sees the light of day again. She has one chance, one ally, the stranger whose simple kindness unlocked everything. As the security guards steer her past where Thomas stands frozen, she lurches toward him. It looks like a stumble, a moment of weakness. The guards tighten their grip, but she uses the motion to get close, her face just inches from his. "The back seat," she whispers, her voice a frantic, desperate rush of words against his ear. "I was filming the storm on my phone." The video. It's in the cloud. I don't remember the password. Her eyes, beautiful and blind and full of a terrifying newfound clarity, are aimed at his face. It's a plea, a prayer, and a passing of a torch, all in one breathless sentence. Before Thomas can respond, before he can even process the immense weight of what she has just told him, she is gone. Swept away by the guards and her father, who places a possessive arm around her shoulders, performing his role of the dutiful parent to the very end. The crowd parts for them, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Then they are gone, and the ballroom begins to buzz with the delicious, scandalous gossip of the year. Thomas is left standing alone on the vast, empty dance floor. The music is still silent. The invisible man is now the most visible person in the room. He is the janitor who danced with the heiress, the catalyst for the chaos. A portly man in a tuxedo, the hotel manager, approaches him, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Kellen!" the manager sputters, his voice trembling with rage. "What in God's name do you think you were doing?" Thomas says nothing. His mind is reeling, the echo of Emma's whisper overriding everything else. The video, it's in the cloud. "You're a janitor. Your job is to be invisible," the manager continues, his voice rising. "You have caused a catastrophic embarrassment for Mr. Drake and for this establishment. You're fired, of course. Get your things from your locker and be out of the service exit in 5 minutes. If I see you anywhere on this property again, I will have you arrested for trespassing." The verdict is delivered with cold, swift finality. There is no appeal. Thomas simply nods. He turns his back on the glittering crowd and the man who has just taken his livelihood and walks off the dance floor. He doesn't look back. He moves through the swinging doors into the starkly lit, stainless steel world of the service corridors. The glamour of the gala is instantly gone, replaced by the clatter of dishes and the smell of industrial cleaner. No one here meets his eye. The news has already spread. He is the man who flew too close to the sun. He cleans out his small metal locker, the contents meager. A worn photo of his wife, Amanda. A drawing Maeve made for him of a unicorn, a spare pair of work boots. He stuffs it all into his backpack. He is no longer an employee. He is a trespasser. 5 minutes later, he pushes open the heavy steel door of the service exit and steps out into the cool night air of a back alley. The alley smells of garbage and rain. In the distance, he can hear the faint, muffled sound of the orchestra starting up again, a cheerful tune designed to erase the unpleasantness, to get the party back on track. He walks to the end of the alley and looks up. Towering over the city is the Drake Industries building, its top floors a beacon of light in the night sky. The penthouse, where Emma is now a prisoner, is up there somewhere in the clouds. He has lost his job. He has made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the city. He is a single father with bills to pay and a daughter to feed. He has every reason to walk away, to forget the crazy, beautiful blind girl and the secret she whispered in his ear. But he can't. He thinks of the decade of guilt she carried. He thinks of the monstrous lie Malcolm told. And he thinks of his own wife, Amanda, whose name was slandered and whose memory was sacrificed to protect that lie. He clutches the straps of his backpack. He has nothing. No access, no money, no power. All he has is a whispered secret and a promise he made to himself a long time ago, to always fight for the truth. The odds are impossible, but standing there in the alley, a fired janitor against a billionaire, Thomas Kellen makes a choice. He will not walk away. He will find that password. He will find that video. He will fight for the ghost of his wife and the future of the woman he danced with. The first light of dawn was filtering through the blinds of his small apartment when Thomas finally got home. He moved with the quiet stealth of a man who didn't want to wake his sleeping child. The adrenaline from the gala had long since worn off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the cold, gnawing anxiety of unemployment. His job at the Drake Tower hadn't been glamorous, but it had been steady. It paid the rent. It put food on the table for Maeve. He checked on her first. She was curled up in her bed, a tangle of limbs and dark hair, her favorite stuffed fox clutched under her chin. A wave of fierce, protective love washed over him, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. What had he done? He had risked everything for a woman he didn't even know, and now Maeve would pay the price. He gently tucked her blanket around her shoulders and backed out of the room, closing the door to a soft click. In the kitchen, he made coffee. The familiar ritual, a small comfort in a world that had been turned upside down. He sat at the small table and pulled out his phone. He already knew what he would find. The headlines were everywhere. A coordinated media assault. Drake Iris in shocking public breakdown at charity gala. Concern for Emma Drake's mental state after bizarre accusations. CEO Malcolm Drake asks for privacy as daughter struggles with decade-old trauma. They were all spinning the same story, the one Malcolm had crafted in an instant on that dance floor. Emma was the disturbed, tragic figure. Her father was the noble, suffering patriarch. The janitor, when mentioned at all, was a footnote, an unidentified employee whose inappropriate actions may have triggered the episode. They had erased him, just as they had erased Emma's truth. He scrolled through the comment sections, a pit forming in his stomach. The public had swallowed the lie whole. So sad, that poor girl needs help. Her father is a saint for putting up with that. I can't believe they let a janitor just walk up to her like that. He snapped the phone shut, the injustice of it all a bitter taste in his mouth. They had no idea. They saw a performance and believed it was reality. Daddy? Maeve stood in the kitchen doorway, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. You're home early? Thomas forced a smile. Morning, sweet pea. Yeah, it was a slow night. She padded over to him and climbed into his lap, her usual morning ritual. Can you make pancakes? The ones with the chocolate chip smiley faces? You bet, he said, his voice thick with emotion as he hugged her tight. As he flipped pancakes, Maeve chattered about school, about her friends, about a dream she'd had where their stuffed fox could talk. Her innocent, happy world was the one thing Malcolm Drake couldn't touch, and Thomas swore he would do anything to keep it that way. Are you going to work again tonight? she asked, her mouth full of pancake. Thomas paused. No, honey. I decided to take a new job, a better one. The lie felt like ash in his mouth, but he couldn't tell her the truth. He couldn't put the weight of his problems on her small shoulders. He spent the day with her, a forced, cheerful performance of normalcy. They went to the park, they read books, they built a pillow fort in the living room. But with every laugh, every hug, his mind was racing, turning over the impossible problem. The video? It's in the cloud. I don't remember the password. How could he possibly help her now? He was an outsider. The Drake Tower was a fortress, and he had been exiled from it. Emma was a prisoner in the penthouse, likely under constant watch, her phone and computer taken away. She couldn't help him, and he couldn't reach her. The password was the key, a 10-year-old password. He thought about what he was like at 16. His passwords then were a clumsy mix of his favorite band and his first girlfriend's birthday. A 16-year-old girl's password would be something deeply personal from that specific time in her life. A favorite book, a secret nickname, the name of a pet. The answer wasn't in a database. It was in Emma's past. A past that was physically located in that penthouse. Her old room, her old belongings. They had to hold a clue. The plan that began to form in his mind was insane. It was reckless. If he was caught, he wouldn't just be charged with trespassing. Drake would bury him. He would lose Maeve. But then he pictured Emma's face at the gala, the moment her memory returned, the brief, brilliant flash of liberation before her father extinguished it. He thought of his own wife's name being dragged through the mud for a decade. The risk was immense, but the cost of doing nothing was higher. That night, after he tucked Maeve into bed, he walked to his closet. He pulled out his old janitor's uniform. It was clean, pressed, and hung in a plastic garment bag. He laid it on his bed. He knew the building's routines. He knew the graveyard shift, from 2 to 5 a.m., was the quietest. He knew the West Side service entrance had a security camera with a notorious blind spot by the recycling dumpsters. He knew that the third-floor freight elevator was rarely used after midnight. He had been invisible for a reason. He had watched. He had learned. He scribbled a note for Maeve and left it on the kitchen table, a knot of fear tightening in his stomach. It was a simple note, telling her he loved her and that Mrs. Gable from next door would be there if she woke up. He prayed she would never have to read it. At 1:45 a.m., he stood across the street from the colossal, glittering Drake Tower. It loomed over him, a monument to the power of the man he was about to defy. He was just one man, a janitor with a backpack and a desperate, half-baked plan. He pulled the collar of his jacket up against the chill and watched the lone security guard complete his patrol, his flashlight beam cutting a lazy arc through the darkness before he disappeared around the far side of the building. The window of opportunity was open. It would only last for a few minutes. Thomas took a deep, shuddering breath. His heart pounded against his ribs. He thought of Maeve, of Amanda, of Emma. Then he stepped out of the shadows and began to walk purposefully toward the service entrance. The alley was a deep well of shadow, but the West Side service entrance was bathed in the cold, sterile glow of a single security lamp. Thomas watched it from the darkness, his heart a frantic, uneven rhythm against his ribs. The keypad next to the steel door gleamed. He knew the standard janitorial code was changed weekly, but the overnight maintenance override, code 7B-Delta, was hardwired into the system and rarely updated. It was a fail-safe, meant for emergencies. Using it now was a gamble. After the gala, Malcolm's security would be on high alert. They could have purged everything. He took the gamble. He stepped out of the alley and walked across the empty loading dock, his movements calm and purposeful, just as they had been every night for 2 years. He didn't look at the security camera with the blind spot. A direct glance was a sign of guilt. He reached the keypad, his fingers hovering over the numbers, slick with a cold sweat. He punched in the code, 7B-Delta-91. A red light blinked twice. Access denied. His blood ran cold. They had changed it. It was over before it even began. He was about to turn to melt back into the shadows when the keypad gave a soft electronic chirp. The red light turned green. The heavy magnetic lock inside the door clicked open. It was a time delay, a security feature he had forgotten. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the heavy door open just enough to slip inside and let it close silently behind him. He was in. The air was cool and smelled of bleach and floor wax. This was his world, the service corridors, a maze of concrete and steel that was the building's true circulatory system. He moved quickly, his soft-soled work boots making no sound on the polished floor. He knew this route by heart. Left at the main laundry, right at the HVAC control, through the double doors to the central service shaft. He heard the distant hum of a floor buffer on one of the lower levels and froze, pressing himself into the alcove of a linen closet. The sound faded. He moved on. The main obstacle was the penthouse freight elevator. It was a separate system, requiring a platinum-level key card. He had seen managers use it. A simple tap and a beep granting access to the top of the world. He had no such card, but he had knowledge. He had spent hundreds of boring hours on this elevator, cleaning it, repairing its tracks, and listening to the stories of the maintenance crews. He knew its secret flaw. He stepped inside the cavernous steel box and pressed the button for the 40th floor, the highest level accessible with a standard janitor's override. The doors closed and the elevator began its smooth ascent. He watched the floor numbers climb. 35, 36, 37. Now. He jammed his hand between the closing doors, triggering the emergency sensor. The elevator shuddered to a violent halt, the lights flickering. An alarm began to chime softly. This was the most dangerous part of the plan. The emergency stop would send a silent alert to the main security desk. He had, at most, 90 seconds before someone came to investigate. He pried the doors open a crack. As the old maintenance chief had once drunkenly complained, the elevator's guidance system had a glitch. A sudden stop between floors would cause the destination panel to reboot. During that reboot, for about 5 seconds, the system was unlocked. He jabbed the button for the penthouse service entrance. PHS. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the button lit up with a soft white glow. The doors slid shut, the alarm ceased, and the elevator resumed its climb, this time all the way to the top. The doors opened into a quiet, carpeted service hall. This was the back of the house for the penthouse itself. A gleaming stainless steel kitchen, a pantry, and a series of unmarked storage rooms. He was in Malcolm Drake's home. The thought sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through him. He moved down the corridor, his senses on high alert. He could hear the faint, rhythmic breathing of someone sleeping in a nearby room. Staff quarters. He needed to find Emma's old bedroom. Malcolm, in his performance of the grieving father, would have preserved it, a shrine to the daughter he'd lost before the accident. He found it at the end of a private hallway. The door was unlocked. He slipped inside, closing it silently behind him, and was immediately transported back in time. The room was a perfect time capsule of a 16-year-old girl's life from a decade ago. Posters of indie bands were on the wall. A stack of classic novels sat on a nightstand. A ballet shoe, its ribbon frayed, lay on a dusty dresser. It was a room full of ghosts. He couldn't turn on the lights. Using the faint glow of his phone's screen, he began to search, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a strange, invasive guilt. He was trespassing on her memories. He scanned book titles, looking for a word or a name that stood out. He checked the back of a framed photo of Emma and her mother, both of them smiling, radiant. Nothing. Then he saw it. On a small desk in the corner, a leather-bound diary. It was locked with a simple, flimsy brass lock. He pulled a bent paperclip from his pocket, a trick he'd used 100 times to open jammed locker doors, and gently worked it into the keyhole. After a few tense seconds, he felt a faint click. He opened the book. He didn't read the entries. He felt like a ghoul, a voyeur of a dead girl's life, because the girl who wrote this was, in a way, gone. He scanned the pages quickly, his eyes searching for a repeated phrase, a pet name, a secret word. He found it on a page dated a week before the accident. She wrote about a night she and her mother had snuck out onto the roof with a telescope. Her mother had pointed out a specific constellation and told her a story about it. Emma had written, "Mom says that no matter what happens, I should always look for Cassiopeia. She says it's our star. She calls me her starlight." The word jumped off the page. Starlight. It felt right. It was sentimental, secret. A word of love tied to her mother and a memory before the fall. This had to be it. He had the key. He carefully relocked the diary and placed it back on the desk, exactly where he had found it. He had what he came for. Now he just had to get out. He was turning to leave when he heard it. A soft click from down the hall. The sound of a doorknob turning. Someone was awake. Thomas froze, his body rigid. The only way out was through the door he had just come in. He was trapped, a ghost in a room full of ghosts, and the owner of the house was stirring. Thomas didn't think. He moved. His body reacted with the primal instinct to hide, diving into the deep, walk-in closet and pulling the heavy wooden door shut, leaving only a hairline crack to see through. He held his breath, his back pressed against a row of musty-smelling coats, his heart hammering a deafening rhythm in his ears. The closet was pitch black and smelled of cedar and forgotten perfume. Soft, hesitant footsteps approached in the hallway and stopped directly outside the door. The brass doorknob turned with an agonizingly slow creak. The door swung open, casting a sliver of pale moonlight from the room's large window across the floor. A figure stepped inside. It was Emma. She was wearing a simple white silk nightgown, her bare feet silent on the thick rug. She moved with the unnerving grace of someone navigating a familiar space in total darkness, her hands held slightly out in front of her, not for balance, but as feelers. Her face was a pale, haunted mask in the gloom. Thomas's mind raced. What was she doing here? Was she sleepwalking? Or had the trauma of the evening drawn her back to the last place she had been whole? She drifted through the room like a ghost, her fingertips brushing lightly against the surfaces of her past life. She touched the wooden frame of her desk, the cold glass of a picture frame, the soft, worn fabric of the armchair in the corner. It was a pilgrimage of touch, a desperate attempt to connect with the girl she had been before the crash. She came to a stop in the middle of the room, her head tilted as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. "Mama," she whispered, the single word so full of a decade of loss that it was a physical blow. Thomas felt his own grief for his wife, Amanda, rise in his throat. Emma sank down onto the edge of her old bed, her shoulders slumping. She was no longer the poised, defiant woman from the gala. She was just a girl in a dark room, lost and alone. Thomas watched, frozen, a helpless witness to her profound sorrow. He felt like a ghoul, a trespasser on the most sacred ground of her grief. Then she whispered another word, a name spoken to the ghosts in the room. "Starlight," she breathed, the word a sigh of pure longing. It was a confirmation. Thomas's heart leapt. He had the right password. He had the key. His relief was immediately crushed by a new wave of terror. Emma, in her blind exploration of the room, began to move again. She stood and walked toward the dresser, the very piece of furniture that stood next to the closet where he was hiding. Her hand traced the edge of the wood, getting closer and closer to the closet door. Thomas held his breath, praying she wouldn't decide to open it, wouldn't have a sudden urge to touch the clothes of the girl she used to be. Her fingers brushed against the cool brass of the doorknob. His entire body went rigid. It was over. He was caught, but her hand paused, then fell away. Her questing fingers had found what they were looking for, the small, velvet-covered jewelry box he had seen earlier. She opened it, and her fingers sifted through the contents, not looking for a specific item, but just for the feel of the familiar, forgotten shapes. Suddenly, a new sound came from the hallway, a sharp, professionally cheerful voice. "Miss Drake? Emma? Are you in here?" A woman in a crisp nurse's uniform appeared in the doorway, her silhouette backlit by the hall light. Emma flinched, her private moments shattered. "I'm here, Helen," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You shouldn't be wandering," the nurse said, her tone a mixture of gentle chiding and firm authority. "Your father was very clear. You need your rest." "This was my room," Emma said quietly, a statement of fact, not a protest. "I know, dear. But your new room has everything you need," the nurse said, walking over and gently taking Emma's arm. "Come on, let's get you back to bed. I'll make you some warm milk." The words were kind, but the action was that of a guard leading a prisoner. The nurse guided the compliant, unresisting Emma out of the room, pulling the door closed behind them, plunging the space back into darkness and silence. Thomas waited, his muscles screaming from the tension for what felt like an eternity. He counted to 500 before he dared to move. He eased the closet door open and slipped back into the room, his mission complete, but his heart heavy with what he had just witnessed. Emma wasn't just a prisoner of her father's lie. She was a prisoner in her own home. His escape was a blur of calculated risks and adrenaline. He retraced his steps, his mind no longer on the fear of being caught, but on the new, monumental problem that lay before him. He made it to the freight elevator, down to the ground floor, and out the service entrance into the pre-dawn chill without incident. He walked the deserted city streets as the first gray light of morning began to erase the stars. He had done the impossible. He had broken into the fortress and stolen the secret. He had the password. He let himself into his apartment, the silence a welcome relief. Maeve was still sound asleep. He walked into his small living room and looked at the framed photo of his wife, Amanda, on the mantelpiece. Her smile, so full of life and love, seemed to reach out to him. He had the word, Starlight, that could clear her name. He had the key to the video that would prove Emma's story and expose Malcolm Drake as a monster. But as the relief washed over him, a cold, hard reality set in, erasing his triumph. The key was useless if he couldn't get it to the prisoner. Emma was locked away, monitored 24/7, with no phone, no computer, no access to the outside world. He couldn't email her. He couldn't call her. He couldn't walk up to the front door of the Drake Tower and ask to see her. He was the fired janitor, the man Malcolm Drake now considered a mortal enemy. He sank onto his sofa, the weight of the new challenge crushing him. How do you get a message to a girl who can't see, who is guarded around the clock, and who lives at the top of a skyscraper he was now banned from even approaching? He had the key, but the lock was 1,000 feet in the air, behind an army of guards, and in the hands of a girl who had no idea he had found it. For 3 days, Thomas existed in a state of suspended animation. He took Maeve to school, helped her with her homework, and read her bedtime stories, all while his mind churned with an impossible problem. He had the key. Starlight, a word that felt both sacred and explosive, but it was useless. It was like knowing the combination to a safe that was on the other side of the planet. His first thought was to go to the police, but he dismissed it instantly. What would he tell them? That the CEO's blind daughter, who had just had a public breakdown, had whispered a conspiracy theory to him. He was a fired janitor with an axe to grind. They would laugh him out of the station. The media was out of the question. They were already painting Malcolm as a saint and Emma as a disturbed young woman. He was on his own. He needed a messenger, a way to breach the walls of the penthouse and deliver a one-word message to a girl who couldn't see it. The message had to be invisible to her guards, but obvious to her. The idea came to him in the middle of the public library, while Maeve was happily engrossed in a picture book. He was scrolling through news articles about Malcolm Drake, trying to find a weakness, when he saw a photo from a previous year's gala. On a table in the background was a massive, opulent floral arrangement. The caption credited Fleur Royale, the most exclusive florist in the city. Drake Industries had a corporate account. Flowers were a regular delivery. They were a Trojan horse. But how do you write a message for a blind person? The answer was on the computer in front of him. He typed "alphabet for the blind" into the search bar. The screen filled with images of Braille, a system of raised dots. It was a foreign language, but for a single word, it was a code he could learn. He spent the next hour in a quiet corner of the library, the Braille alphabet on his phone screen, a napkin and a pin from his wallet in his hands. He carefully, painstakingly, punched the dots for each letter into the soft paper. STARLIGHT. To anyone else, it would look like meaningless indentations, but to fingertips trained by a decade of darkness to read the world, it would be a word. It would be a key. The next morning, he took the last of his severance pay from his bank account. It was the money meant for next month's rent, for groceries, for Maeve's school trip. He walked into the hushed, fragrant interior of Fleur Royale, his worn work jacket and jeans feeling painfully out of place among the perfumed patrons. "I'd like to send an arrangement to the Drake Tower penthouse," he told the skeptical-looking clerk, his voice steady. "To Miss Emma Drake." He chose the most expensive arrangement of stargazer lilies they had, the name a nod to the password itself. The cost made his stomach clench. He paid in cash, the wad of bills looking pathetic and worn. "And the card?" the clerk asked, her tone softening slightly. He took the small, thick card. In neat, block letters, he wrote a simple, anonymous message. "Hoping you feel better soon." Then, he turned the card over. Beneath the heavy embossing of the florist's logo, he took out his pin. With the same meticulous care he'd practiced in the library, he pressed the 8 letters into the cardstock. 8 tiny clusters of raised dots. A secret, whispered through paper. He left the shop feeling both lighter and terrified. He had sent his message. He had bet his family's entire security on the hope that a flower delivery would get past the guards, that Emma would happen to touch the back of the card, and that she would understand. It was a shot in the dark, but as he walked home, he was struck by the second, even more difficult problem. The password was useless without a device. A phone, a computer. Emma had neither. The key was on its way, but the lock was still missing. He wrestled with the problem for the rest of the day. How could he possibly get a phone to her? He couldn't hide it in a cake. He couldn't mail it. He needed to get physically close to her again, a feat that seemed impossible. The solution, once again, came from the enemy. That evening, while scrolling through a society blog, he saw it, an announcement from Drake Industries' PR department. To demonstrate his daughter's steady recovery, and to quell the unfortunate rumors about her well-being, Malcolm Drake would be making a generous donation to the Botanical Garden's new sensory exhibit for the visually impaired. He and his daughter, Emma, would attend the press conference and ribbon-cutting ceremony in 2 days. It was a classic Malcolm Drake move, a brilliant, cynical piece of public relations theater. He would parade his daughter through a garden for the blind to prove how much he cared. It was disgusting. It was also an opportunity. The event would be swarming with security, but it was a public space. They couldn't stop a father and his daughter from enjoying a day at the gardens. He bought a simple prepaid smartphone, the cheapest one he could find. It was small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. He charged it fully, set the homepage to the login screen for Emma's email provider, and wrapped it in a soft cloth glasses case to protect it. That night, he sat down with Maeve. This was the hardest part. "Honey," he began, his heart aching. "Do you remember we talked about how sometimes you have to help people, even when it's scary?" Maeve nodded, her expression serious. "Like the girl at the party." "Exactly like her," Thomas said. "Her name is Emma, and she's in a lot of trouble. Her father, he's not a nice man. He's keeping her locked away and telling lies about her." He explained his plan in the simplest terms, that they would go to the gardens, that Emma would be there, that Maeve needed to deliver a small package to her without anyone seeing. "You'll have to be very brave," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "You'll just be a little girl who accidentally bumps into a lady, and when you do, you need to slip this into her coat pocket." Can you do that for me? For Emma. He held out the small cloth-wrapped phone. Maeve looked from the package to her father's worried face. She was only 8, but she understood loyalty. She understood injustice. And she had seen the sadness in the pretty lady's face at the gala. She took the phone from him, her small hand closing around it. "I can do it, Daddy," she said, her voice small but firm. "I'll help her." Thomas pulled her into a fierce hug, overwhelmed by his love for her and terrified of what he was asking. He was putting his own daughter in the line of fire, turning her into a spy in a war she didn't understand. It was a desperate, dangerous plan, and everything depended on the courage of an 8-year-old girl. The 2 days leading up to the Botanical Garden event were the longest of Thomas's life. He was suspended in a state of agonizing uncertainty. Had the flowers reached her? Had the card been thrown away? Did she even know Braille? He was haunted by 100 different ways his desperate plan could have failed. Meanwhile, inside the penthouse, Emma was living in a quiet, padded prison. After the gala, her father had tripled her care. The nurse, Helen, was no longer just an assistant, but a constant shadow. All of her meals were brought to her room. Her walks were confined to a sterile private hallway. Malcolm had spoken to her only once, his voice a chillingly calm instrument of psychological torture. "You are unwell, Emma," he had said. "You will remain here, resting, until your memory of this fantasy fades. We will not speak of it again." On the second day, a delivery arrived. Helen announced it with forced cheerfulness. "Well, look at this! Someone sent you the most beautiful flowers." Emma heard the rustle of paper and the soft clink of a vase being placed on her table. The scent that filled the room was immediate and overwhelming. A sweet, heady perfume that cut through the sterile air. Stargazer lilies. A faint, pleasant memory surfaced. Her mother loved lilies. "They're lovely," Helen said. "The card just says, 'Hoping you feel better soon,' no name." "I'll just toss it out for you." "No, wait," Emma said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Let me see it." "See it?" Helen asked, confused. "Hold it," Emma corrected herself, a touch of irritation in her tone. "I want to hold it." Helen hesitated, then relented, placing the thick embossed card into Emma's outstretched hand. "Of course, dear." Emma's fingers, which had spent 10 years learning to read the world through texture, immediately registered the anomalies on the back of the card. They were not smudges or accidental marks. They were deliberate, patterned, raised dots. Her heart began to pound. She had taken a few Braille lessons as a teenager, a frustrating exercise she'd mostly abandoned. But the alphabet, the basic shapes of the letters, were still filed away in her memory. She traced the first cluster of dots with the tip of her index finger, a vertical line of 3. The letter L. Then she realized it wasn't L. Her finger had missed a dot to the side. She started again, more carefully this time. 4 dots in a square, SAT shape, T, 3 dots in an L shape, A. Her breath hitched. She traced the rest of the letters, her mind racing, her fingers trembling. STARLIGHT, starlight. The word, her mother's secret nickname for her, was a key turning a lock deep inside her soul. It was a message, a confirmation. The janitor, the kind man at the gala. He had seen her truth, and he was trying to help her. For the first time in a decade, Emma Drake did not feel entirely alone. Hope, a feeling so foreign it was almost painful, flickered to life in the darkness. 2 days later, the air at the Botanical Gardens was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming roses. It was also thick with tension. A flock of reporters and photographers were herded by a stern-looking PR team, their cameras trained on the main path. Thomas stood with Maeve near a large fountain, his stomach in a tight, nervous knot. He had dressed them in generic tourist clothes, jeans, sweaters, and a baseball cap for himself, pulled down low. He clutched Maeve's hand, his own slick with sweat. "Is that her, Daddy?" Maeve whispered, pointing toward a procession moving down the path. It was. Malcolm Drake was in his element, smiling for the cameras, one hand held up to greet a city council member. His other hand was gripping Emma's arm. She was dressed in an elegant cream-colored coat, her face hidden behind dark glasses, her expression unreadable. She walked where he guided her, a beautiful, silent puppet. Thomas knelt down, his eyes level with his daughter's. He could see the fear in her eyes, but also a fierce resolve that made his heart ache with pride. "Okay, remember the plan," he whispered, his voice shaky. "When he stops by that big purple flower bush, that's our chance. Just like we practiced. Make it look like an accident." He pressed the small, cloth-wrapped phone into her hand. Maeve clutched it tight and nodded, her small face set with determination. The press conference began. Malcolm spoke eloquently about the importance of making nature accessible to all. He guided Emma's hand to touch a specially designed plaque with Braille lettering, a moment of perfectly staged compassion that made Thomas's blood boil. The cameras flashed, capturing the image of the devoted father and his brave, blind daughter. Then, as the formal presentation ended, Malcolm began to lead Emma down a narrower path, a photo-op stroll through the sensory garden. The reporters followed, a chaotic scrum of bodies and equipment. "Now," Thomas breathed. "Go now." Maeve took a deep breath and let go of his hand. She began to run, not directly at them, but in a playful, looping path, as if chasing a butterfly. She was just a little girl in a garden, completely innocent, completely invisible to the security guards whose eyes were scanning the adult crowd for threats. Malcolm stopped by a large lilac bush to answer a reporter's question. He was distracted. His grip on Emma's arm loosened for a fraction of a second. It was all the time Maeve needed. She veered, her path intersecting perfectly with Emma's. She stumbled, as if tripping on a root, and bumped squarely into Emma's side, letting out a small, convincing oof. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Maeve cried out, looking up with wide, apologetic eyes. In that single fluid motion of the collision, her small hand darted into the deep, open pocket of Emma's coat and released the phone. Emma flinched, startled by the unexpected contact. The two security guards tensed, taking a step forward. Malcolm looked down, his face a mask of annoyance at the interruption. Thomas was there in an instant, playing his part. "Maeve, I am so sorry, Mr. Drake. Miss Drake. She's a bit clumsy today." He grabbed Maeve's hand, his expression a perfect blend of embarrassment and paternal frustration. "Come on, honey, let's go. We're bothering these people." He pulled a star-struck-looking Maeve away, melting back into a crowd of onlookers before anyone could get a good look at his face. They didn't stop walking until they were out of the gardens and halfway down the street. The immediate danger was over. They were clear. Back in the garden, Emma stood beside her father as he smoothly redirected the press. Her mind was reeling. She had felt the bump, heard the little girl's apology, and then felt the small, hard, cloth-wrapped object slide into her pocket. It was still there, a secret weight against her leg. Her heart was pounding. She knew, with absolute certainty, what it was. And she knew, with the same certainty, who had sent it. She had the password, and now she had the lock. But she was standing in a garden, surrounded by her father's guards and the entire city's media, a prisoner on public display. The key was in her hand, but the cage was locked tighter than ever. The ride back to the penthouse was a silent, suffocating ordeal. Malcolm sat beside her in the back of the town car, the air thick with his unspoken fury. He didn't speak to her, but she could feel his anger like a physical force, a cold, heavy presence in the car. The mask of the concerned father had been dropped. She was back to being his prisoner, and she knew her punishment for the scene at the gala would be severe. Helen, the nurse, met them at the door to the penthouse, her expression grim. "I'll take her from here, Mr. Drake," she said, her voice clipped. Malcolm didn't even look at his daughter. "See that you do," he said, before striding away toward his home office, the sound of his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor, a final, dismissive punctuation mark. Helen led Emma to her room, her grip on Emma's arm firm and unyielding. The pretense of gentle care was gone. "You've caused your father a great deal of trouble, Emma," Helen said, her voice cold. "He is a very busy, very important man. He does not need these theatrical displays." She was guided into her bedroom and the door was closed behind her, the lock clicking with an unnerving finality. Emma stood alone in the center of the room, her heart pounding. The small, hard shape of the phone in her coat pocket felt like a burning coal. She had to act now, before Helen came back, before they took her coat, before they found it. She needed a diversion, a moment alone. "Helen," she called out, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of distress. "Oh, no. Helen, I think I'm going to be sick." She heard the nurse sigh with exasperation from the other room. "Just a moment." Emma fumbled her way to a large decorative vase on a side table, the one that held the stargazer lilies. She grabbed it, her hands trembling, and sent it crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering porcelain and splashing water was an explosion in the quiet apartment. Helen burst into the room. "Emma! What on earth did you do?" "My stomach. I'm so sorry. I felt faint." Emma gasped, clutching her abdomen. I need to use the bathroom. Please." The nurse, faced with a hysterical patient and a massive, watery mess, made a calculated choice. All right, go on. I'll get the cleaning supplies." It was the opening she needed. Emma rushed into her ensuite bathroom and locked the door. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely find the latch. Leaning against the cold marble, she took a deep, shuddering breath. She had minutes, at most. She pulled the cloth-wrapped phone from her pocket. Her fingers fumbled with the unfamiliar shape. She found the power button and held it down. A moment later, the phone vibrated to life in her hand. She had never used a smartphone without assistance, but she knew they had accessibility features. She triple-tapped the screen, and a calm, robotic voice spoke from the small device. "Voice over on." Her breath caught. It worked. Following the audio prompts, her fingers flying across the screen, she connected the phone to the penthouse's private Wi-Fi network. Then, the moment of truth. She navigated to the web browser, to the login screen for her old email provider. Email address, text field. She carefully typed in the email she hadn't used in a decade. Password, secure text field. Her fingers trembled as she typed the word, the secret her mother had given her, the key the janitor had returned to her. STARLIGHT. She hit enter. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the robotic voice spoke again. "Logan successful. Welcome, Emma Drake." A sob of pure, unadulterated relief escaped her lips. She was in. She commanded the phone to open her cloud storage. The voice began to list the contents, file by forgotten file. Folder, photos, folder, schoolwork, folder, videos. "Open videos," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Folder, August 10 years ago," the voice announced, and Emma's heart stopped. "File, DSC 0417, movie. Play," she commanded. "Play the video." There was a click, and then the sound. The audio from that night filled the small bathroom, a ghost screaming from the tiny speaker. She heard the waltz on the radio, the drumming of the rain, and then the voices. Her mother's, clear as day. "Malcolm, please, not in front of Emma." And her father's reply, a cold snarl she now recognized all too well. "You will not question my decisions." Not ever. She heard her own 16-year-old voice, small and scared. "Dad, you're scaring me." Then, the sound that had been buried deepest of all. Her mother's sharp, terrified scream. The sickening, wrenching sound of the steering wheel being jerked hard to the right, followed by the shriek of tires and the horrifying, explosive cacophony of metal twisting and glass shattering. The recording ended in an abrupt, terrifying silence. It was all there. It was real. She hadn't imagined it. She slumped to the floor, the phone clutched in her hand, tears streaming down her face. They were not tears of grief, but of vindication. The 10-year-old weight of guilt dissolved, replaced by the white-hot certainty of the truth. A sharp knock came at the door. "Emma?" "Are you all right in there? Open the door." It was Helen. Emma knew she couldn't stay here. Her father would find a way to bury this, to bury her. She had the proof, but she was still in his cage. She needed to get out. She needed to get this video to people he couldn't control. His board of directors, the people whose money and power gave him his crown. She took a deep breath, stood up, and splashed cold water on her face. She hid the phone back in its cloth wrapping and tucked it deep into the pocket of her robe. She unlocked the door. "I'm fine," she said, her voice startlingly calm. "I'm just tired. I'd like to rest." The next 2 days were a blur of quiet planning. Using the phone in secret, she learned that the Drake Industries annual board meeting was scheduled for the end of the week. It was her only chance. She made one call, a number she had to guess at until she got it right. "Kellen," a voice answered, rough with sleep. "It's Emma," she whispered. "I have the video. I need your help." One last time. On the morning of the board meeting, Thomas waited in a service van parked in the Drake Towers loading dock, his heart pounding. He wore the uniform of a third-party catering company, a disguise that had cost him his last $100. At precisely 9:45 a.m., as per their plan, a fire alarm was triggered on one of the empty office floors below the penthouse. A false alarm pulled by a disgruntled kitchen worker Thomas had known, a man who had his own reasons to hate Malcolm Drake. In the ensuing confusion, with Helen and the security guard distracted, Emma slipped out of the penthouse service entrance and made her way to the freight elevator, where Thomas was waiting. They rode down in silence, two co-conspirators on a mission to topple a king. They walked into the executive boardroom on the 50th floor just as Malcolm was boasting about record-breaking quarterly profits. The dozen board members seated around the massive mahogany table looked up in surprise. Malcolm's face turned from triumphant to thunderous in an instant. "Emma, what is the meaning of this?" "Security," he bellowed. "They're a little busy, Father," Emma said, her voice calm and clear as she walked toward the head of the table. Thomas followed a few steps behind, a silent guardian. "Before you have me thrown out," Emma continued, addressing the board, "I have a piece of old business I believe is relevant to the company's integrity. A recording from 10 years ago." Before Malcolm could react, she took out the small phone and, with a few practice taps, connected it via Bluetooth to the room's state-of-the-art sound system. "What is this foolishness?" a board member demanded. "Listen," was all Emma said. She pressed play. The sound filled the boardroom, crisp and horrifyingly clear. The rain, the music, the argument, the raw, unfiltered sound of a man's rage causing a fatal crash. The board members sat frozen, their faces pale. Malcolm lunged for the phone, but Thomas was there, blocking his path with a quiet, unmovable presence. When the recording ended with the sound of the crash, the silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Malcolm Drake, exposed and defeated, sank into his chair, his face the color of ash. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Malcolm was ousted by the board that afternoon. By evening, the district attorney, armed with the video, had launched a criminal investigation. His empire, built on a lie, had been dismantled by a 10-year-old ghost in a machine. 6 months later, Thomas and Maeve sat on a park bench, sharing a bag of popcorn. It was a bright, sunny afternoon. A woman approached, walking with a white cane, tapping it gently on the pavement in front of her. She was smiling, a genuine, radiant smile that seemed to light up her whole face. "Thought I might find you here," Emma said, her voice warm. "Hey, you," Thomas replied, his own smile easy and natural. Emma sat down with them, and Maeve immediately launched into a detailed story about her day at school. Emma listened, laughing at all the right parts. She was no longer living in the penthouse. She had taken control of her trust fund and established a foundation in her mother's name, dedicated to supporting victims of domestic violence. She was free. The guilt was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady strength. Her friendship with Thomas was the anchor in her new life, a bond forged in a moment of kindness and a fight for the truth. "Thank you, Thomas," she said quietly, while Maeve was distracted by a passing dog. "For believing me." "Always," he replied. He looked at his daughter, happy and safe. He looked at Emma, scarred but whole, finally living in the light. He had lost his job, but he had helped reclaim a life, and in doing so, had finally brought peace to the memory of his own beloved wife. The world was not perfect, but on this sunny afternoon in the park, it felt just, and that was more than enough.